Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Just a little louder. Good morning. Good morning. We know it's nice and cold this morning, so it's a little tough to talk, I know. Anyway, on behalf of the GSAC board, I wanted to welcome all of you today. We're delighted you're here. My name is Dave Fite. I'm the current president of GSAC, and I'm thrilled to be working with a really great board. As you know, one of our key goals is to educate and inform people, either our condo buildings or the residents in Gulfshore Boulevard or in Park Shore or the moorings. We do that in two ways. One is through a newsletter, which I think most of you get, that we circulate to about 3,500 residents across the city. And you probably saw the one that came out last week. And secondly is through our forums. And we're just thrilled to be in person this time. This is the first time we've had an in-person forum since 2020. So it's really terrific to see all of you here. And we're going to surprise those who didn't show up today, is we're going to record the entire process and we'll make it available on our website. So when you get back to your condos, your homes, you can tell your friends that it'll still be available to view tomorrow. So very interesting as we think about what are we going to do in terms of these education forums. We started the whole idea about water quality probably a year ago as a topic we wanted to think about, and it came about because one, the Corps of Engineers was doing their study on resiliency. We've been through, 3 hurricanes since 2005, for those of you who've been here, and each one has gotten worse. We've been through a number of red tide events, one of which we're going through right now. We've had the blue-green algae problem in the last year or two. We've had tremendous development in Collier County, which is concerning people about the availability of water long-term. And we also have the lakes and ponds in the city of Naples, which the city is spending a lot of money to revitalize. And we have Venetian, Mooring Bay, and Naples Bay, both of which are somewhat impaired. So it was pretty easy to say that this is a topic that absolutely everybody would be interested in. And it was, I think, maybe 6 months ago, Christman, City Councilman Ray Christman, was a guest speaker at one of our board meetings. And he suggested that perhaps we put on a water quality forum. And we were saying, we were thinking exactly the same thing. And he was kind enough to volunteer to actually put it together for us, and that's why we're here today. So some of you may know Ray. For those of you who don't, he was elected to City Council in a special election in 2019. He was re-elected in 2022. He sits on the Collier County Coastal Advisory Committee, which advises the Collier County Commission on things as it has to do with the beach and sea level rise and beach renourishment. And in addition, he has been very committed to the environment and to water quality even before he was on City Council. In fact, I think it was in 2020 when kind of the half-previous council was seated. He volunteered to head a volunteer ad hoc environmental committee, which he still heads, and one of their main projects so far is cleaning up Swan Lake and Park Shore. So I'm very delighted that Ray is here with us today. He will introduce the guest speakers and will moderate the entire program for us. So please give Ray a round of welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning to all of you. It's great to have you all here in person, as David said, for this event after too many Zoom meetings over several years. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right, good. I do, at the outset, I do find it, I think it's important and necessary that I clear up one rumor that's been sweeping through Naples in recent weeks in connection with this event. Many people are now saying that it was the GSAC leadership that arranged this recent red tide event as a way to boost attendance for this forum. There's no truth to that. I want to get that on the record here early. But we are here to talk about not just red tide, but more broadly one of the what I think is not just one of the most important issues, but the most important issue facing Naples and Southwest Florida today and for the foreseeable future, which is the issue of water quality and, more broadly, the protection and management of our coastline and our coastal resources in the face of a changing climate. I think we need to recognize this as our preeminent concern, because there's nothing else that really affects the two most important aspects of our lives, which is our natural environment and our economy. We have a visitor and tourism-based economy, real estate-based economy, and obviously our ability to continue to make sure that our waters, our gulf, our bays, our lakes, our rivers, our estuaries are clean and of high quality is going to be the major determinant as to whether people want to still move here, stay here, and enjoy what we have. And similarly, it affects obviously our day-to-day quality of life, and all of us who were experiencing in the last month the effects of red tide, again, and a reminder of how that affects our daily lives can relate to that. So the stakes are high for all of us, and decisions that government at all levels make, private businesses make, nonprofit and community organizations make is all going to shape the ultimate answers as to what direction we should take to deal with how we protect our environment and protect our water resources. So to help us sort out and better frame this complex set of issues, we have a terrific panel here before you, people who are subject matter experts but come at it from the research side, the public policy side, and the practitioner side, as you'll see in a moment. So let me introduce now each of the four of them, and briefly, in the interest of time. And the format is that each of them will come up sequentially and make opening comments of about 10 minutes. And after that is completed, we will have a question and answer session that I'll moderate here at the table. And as you can see from the mic there, at the end, we're going to try to reserve 10 or 15 minutes for questions from the audience as well. So be thinking about that as we talk. Our first panelist here chair to my left is Dr. Mike Parsons. Mike is a professor of marine science at Florida Gulf Coast University. He's also director of the Coastal Watershed Institute and the Vester Marine and Environmental Science Research Field Station here in Collier and Lee counties associated with FGCU. Mike's had an outstanding career as a researcher on various marine ecology issues, including harmful algae blooms and red tide. He's also someone who's very interested in connecting his research and teaching to benefit the community, as exemplified by his work since 2019 as a member of the Governor's Blue-Green Algae Task Force. To his left is Dr. Barry Rosen, who's a world-class scholar and professor at the Water School at Florida Gulf Coast University. He's a leading expert on freshwater algae, harmful algae blooms, and their impacts and potential solutions for mitigation. Prior to joining the university, Barry had a long career in government service, including stints with the U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, EPA, and other government organizations. Like Mike Parsons, Barry's work at FGCU has direct links to helping address the regional impacts we are experiencing with red tide and cyanobacteria in our waters. To Barry's left is Nicole Johnson. Nicole is the Director of Environmental Policy at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. She's been with the Conservancy for 25 years and is a leading expert and advocate for sound growth management and land use planning to protect our natural resources. She leads the Conservancy's efforts to develop environmental policy positions on land and water conservation issues and to promote community awareness of these issues. And then to Nicole's left is Jay Budeshwar. Jay is the city manager for the city of Naples. Some of you have hopefully met him in the past year. He's nearing his 1-year anniversary In his role with the city prior to coming to Naples, Jay had a long career for the town of Palm Beach, serving in various leadership positions, including assistant city manager. Jay's experience on the east coast of Florida and his inclusive, positive, get things done management style have been of tremendous benefit to Naples in his still short time here, and including a lot of experience he's had and brings from the East Coast in the water and environmental area. So it's a great panel. Looking forward to hearing from each of them and getting into the details with questions. And with that, I'm going to ask Mike to come to the podium.
Put a timer on to make sure. I'm going to actually try to keep it short so there's more time for questions and answers. So I think the two things I just want to briefly say would be that we're dealing with algal blooms. That's one of our big concerns with water quality. Just like when people eat too much, we gain weight. When algae eats too much, it increases in biomass, and that's where the nutrients come in. And so you get an increase in biomass because of the nutrients. So what we need to be looking at is ways to reduce the nutrients. That's once things are basically setting up. Barry will talk a little bit about, or maybe some of the questions will come out, why do things bloom? It takes more than nutrients. There's a lot of different algae out there. It's like if all of you had a big old wrestling match and someone came out on top. You know, it's like, how does that competition happen so somebody wins? In this case, why did red tide beat all the other algae that are out there? Why does microcystis beat everything else out there? So there's a lot of science behind that as well. There's control factors. So once there is a bloom, what can be done to try to mitigate the bloom? So there's a lot of technologies that go into that. And I think the last thing I'll say, just as, well, maybe 2 minutes, so I'm still under time. Red tide is natural. All the data point to it starting offshore, natural oceanographic process. It gets pushed inshore, it gets pushed up against our coastline, the cells concentrate. Now our nutrients come into play. Okay, so there's a nutrient role there, but we do not start red tide to the best of our knowledge. So I'll put that little disclaimer on it. The second thing is, as a member of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, we made a lot of recommendations for the state to take steps to reduce nutrients. Some are put in place right away, some are kind of getting muddied up in politics, some haven't been addressed yet, but I'm confident, I'm optimistic that we're making progress. That's one reason why I'm still on the Blue-Green Algae Task Force after 4 years. And one part of that is kind of looking at, you know, the efficacy, the effectiveness of various strategies that I've taken. So I'll stop there, leave more time for questions and answers, and for Barry and the rest of the group. Thank you very much.
Good morning. So, blue-green algae, and actually all algae, there's something common to them all. That's chlorophyll A, which is a molecule that does photosynthesis. There's a waste product that algae make. We kind of need it. It's called oxygen. Because when they split water and do photosynthesis and take carbon dioxide from the air and make sugar, they get rid of oxygen. They kind of need that. About 70% of the oxygen we breathe comes from algae, so we need algae in many senses. But as Mike pointed out, when they go a little berserk and become the dominant organism, whether it's Cyanobacteria, which is the correct name for them, versus Corinium, which is your red tide, versus some blob that seems to be somehow mysteriously ready to crawl onto our shore, they're all algae, and their common thing is, again, chlorophyll A doing photosynthesis. Now, blue-green algae, my specialty, they are bacteria. They're photosynthetic bacteria. So it's kind of a separate group than the kind of bacteria that infect you. But just know, because of that, they like warm temperatures. And they're what's called thermophilic. And as it gets warmer, as our climate has gotten warmer, they are doing better. They're dominating more often. They outcompete organisms that like it cooler. So that's one thing to think about. It's not just water quality, but it's also an increase in temperature. Up north, the lakes are not frozen as long, so these blooms can start earlier in the lakes up north. So we have to think about that too. So yeah, nutrients are really important unless you're the kind of blue-green algae that can take nitrogen right from the air. They can fix atmospheric nitrogen, just like we know clover can do in alfalfa. These bacteria can fix nitrogen right from the air. Not all of them. Microcystis, one of the big bloom formers, cannot. It has to get nitrate from the water. And actually, Microcystis is the genus. It's known that many of the species of Microcystis can make a toxin, microcystin. And microcystin, there's guidelines from EPA on getting it into your drinking water and not letting you all be exposed in your drinking water. We have pretty good criteria for that and another compound too, but microcystin is actually a family of 300 compounds that affect your liver. They're hepatotoxins. Hard to find people that want to do experimentation on that. You know, we can't get volunteers for some reason. But we do the work with mice, and even that gets tough to do nowadays. There are other toxic compounds out there. One is called saxitoxin, and that's the most potent of all the toxins. You've heard of paralytic shellfish poisoning, saxitoxin. Well, cyanobacteria can make saxitoxin, and they probably were the first makers of it, and genetically it moved to the dinoflagellates, so just keep that in mind. And then there's anatoxin, that's just a neurotoxin. You know, if you get exposed to neurotoxins, There's another compound that we're not sure is of importance. It's called BMAA, you probably have heard about it. But every time I've looked for it in water samples with blooms of algae with the cyanobacteria, never found it. It does not seem to be a compound of concern in the algae themselves. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot of work to do on that. So I really want to understand why these organisms bloom. How does one become the dominant? If this one needs a certain phosphorus level, that one needs a different one, different temperature, different nitrogen, different trace metals, all these things, and then you got all the predators, you got all the bacteria that live on these colonies. How does one become the dominant? I call it's harmful algal bloom dynamics. I want to know that because I'm a physiological ecologist. And I think I was telling Ray that I've been doing this for 49 years. But it doesn't matter because I'm still curious. And my job is to learn as much as I can and convey it to students, convey it to you all. You're all my students for the next 5 minutes. And then, it's really important that we know it. We need to know more about the interactions of the cyanobacteria with the Corinia brevis. Because right now, the work I do shows that as soon as my organisms hit that salt water, as they move down into the estuary, they lose their membranes and leak. They leak their toxins, leak their nutrients, but they don't survive. There are marine cyanobacteria, but the ones that are coming from freshwater, let's say down the Coosawhatchee, or if it happens to be a bloom in Lake Okeechobee coming down Lake Okeechobee, there's plenty in all of our freshwater systems. You're not making these things swimming pools. You can't nuke them with enough chlorine or hydrogen peroxide, whatever you might think. We have to learn to live with them and keep their populations changing constantly, because that's what happens. In the winter, you have one group of organisms that transition to the spring, transition to the summer. What you don't want to get stuck in is a bloom that is dominant and keeps blooming and blooming. The other thing that Mike and I have worked on is what's called aerosolization. The red tide, you're breathing it in because the wind and waves whip up the brevetoxin and you breathe it in. So do cyanobacteria do that? Well, our studies so far show something is getting into the air. Mike is telling me that he's finding that dry dust may be part of it. I'm finding whole organisms aerosolize. But do they carry enough toxin for us to be concerned about? It's not the same as brevetoxin. These compounds don't really like to come out into the air, but we're in the middle of concluding some studies. It was funded by the Department of Health, and then I'm doing some more studies with a grad student, and we'll know more about if we have to be worried about aerosols from cyanobacteria. All right, I yield the rest of my time.
Good morning. Well, I left my technology in the back, so I'm going to go old school on the good old watch to do my timing for 10 minutes. Thank you so much for inviting the Conservancy to be part of this discussion. I want to leave with you, I guess, 2 takeaways, and then talk about some of the hot topics that are happening right now that if you're not aware of and engaged in, you really need to be. So, takeaway number 1. What we do on the land directly affects our water quality. And you cannot care about water quality without caring about land use, development, agriculture, what we do on our landscapes. More impervious area, more pavement, more runoff, more water quality problems. So that connection between the land and the water is something that really we all need to pay attention to. And we need to pay attention to how much development is happening today. Even if it seems like it's way far to the east, a lot of that water is still draining into the waterways, and it eventually makes its way to Naples Bay to the Gulf. So the land and water connection, and as Mike pointed out, even though red tide is a naturally occurring algae, we feed it with our nutrient pollution. And so when it comes closer to shore, we are making the intensity, the duration much, much worse. So takeaway number 2 is that restoration is absolutely critical. There are a lot of environmental problems that we need to fix through restoration. However, restoration is only one half of the equation. And as I like to say, just in very blunt terms, we can't continue screwing it up. We cannot continue to be making the same mistakes that are going to result in very expensive restoration projects for the future. Everglades restoration is, of course, the biggie out there, as it should be. It's been ongoing for over 20 years. When it began in the year 2000, it was anticipated to cost about $10.5 billion. Well, the state and federal governments have already spent close to that just since 2016. It's critical that it is completed, and yet the frustration is that we are still doing things, engaging in projects, development activities that are creating tremendous water quality, pollution problems that are going to be the next generation's problem to clean up. So what is happening today, and what are some of those hot topics that you all need to be aware of and get engaged on? Well, first of all, legislative session. There's a lot going on this legislative session. And we have a rather startling dynamic. We have a governor who has issued a really incredible executive order about water quality, about planning, about resilience, about the Everglades, and it has a lot of very, very important content and marching orders for his state agencies to better protect coastal areas through cleaning up poor water, through building resilience into plans, through making sure that local land use plans address water quality and natural resource protection. Then on the other hand, you have a legislature that quite frankly seems hell-bent to pass legislation that would completely undermine the governor's executive order. A lot going on out there, but I do want to mention on the growth management side, again, that land and water connection, a lot of concerning bills are out there. Some of them that would further limit citizens' ability to legally challenge projects that impact natural resources, that impact public facilities, that will cost taxpayers a lot of money to support those projects. So that is a huge concern. On the water policy side, a really, really concerning bill is out there. It's called House Bill 1197. And it would essentially preempt local governments from having any laws to protect water quality, water quantity, pollution control, and wetlands and a few other things. I mean, it is the granddaddy of all preemption bills. Very concerning, especially for local governments like the city of Naples that want to do a better job than the state. Because let's face it, the state is not meeting the goals that it needs to. You look at our rivers, our waterways, hardly any of them are meeting water quality standards. So we need to have local governments that are going to go above and beyond with more stringent fertilizer ordinances, things along those lines. Hopefully that bad water bill isn't going to go anywhere. It was exposed for what it was by Craig Pittman, a statewide reporter who no one comes away from one of his articles completely unscathed. So if you can handle his sarcasm, and I really encourage you to read his article, because the House sponsor of that bad water bill, and a lot of times these bills, the genesis is because one person got in trouble for doing something they shouldn't have done, and so they asked their representative, their senator, to change the law. Well, in this case, I believe it was Representative Maggard. His son got in trouble in Pasco County for tearing out wetlands in violation to the county's wetland laws. And that was the genesis of this bill. So hopefully it won't go anywhere, but it's a huge concern. Another thing that's going on that you need to be aware of is that the state is looking to update their stormwater rule. The stormwater rule essentially guides how much pollution a developer has to clean up before it goes into public waterways and potentially becomes a water quality problem, potentially feeds algae blooms, and becomes a taxpayer responsibility to clean up. We know that current water quality laws do not clean up the amount of pollution, nutrient pollution, that they're supposed to. And so the state has this opportunity to improve upon the laws. I will say that the proposed rule, which is going through its ratification process right now, is a little bit better than current rules. That's not going to fix things, but at least we need to make that step in the right direction. Unfortunately, the regulated community is pushing back very hard and lobbying the legislature to either not move forward with the rule or to weaken it to something that would actually be less protective than what we have today. So that is going through the process right now. Very concerning. If you want more information on that, I encourage you to sign up for action alerts that the Conservancy sends out when we need people to weigh in on these issues. And finally, probably the biggest, potentially most expensive infrastructure project in Collier County's history that will change the character and the landscape of our coastline forever. What am I talking about? Gold stars everywhere, yes. The Army Corps of Engineers, I call it their storm surge study. I think it technically is the Coastal Storm Risk Management Study. This was something that had, I guess, a lot of airtime in the media back in 2000, 2001, when the Corps came in with a lot of expensive, big gates and walls and cutting off passes with huge flood walls. They are looking to, importantly, find ways for our community to be more resilient. The concern, and I think why the Corps kind of went away back in 2001, is that they really didn't focus enough on those nature-based solutions. They really focused on big, massive infrastructure. They're engineers. They engineer things. Well, they're back. And they're looking to get the public's input on how they should plan for Collier County's coastal resilience and protection from future storm surges. And I will say that their starting point is the plan that I don't think anyone liked a couple of years ago. That's where they're starting from. And they're going to be having public meetings in April, so it's coming up really, really fast. And they need to hear from the community. Certainly the Conservancy is going to be there, encouraging them to have resilience, nature-based solutions as part of their planning process. It's a little concerning because the Collier Commissioner's attitude seems to be, it's the Corps, we trust them, they're good people, so let's see what they come up with. But anyone who has participated in a core planning process, any of the Everglades restoration projects, we know that you don't go to the Corps after they've come up with their plan. They're like a big steamer ship. Once they go, you can't turn that ship around. You have to tell them at the beginning of the process what you want them to look at in their plan. So it's going to be in April, probably into May. This is where the community really has to come together, because if we don't, we're going to get a plan designed by a bunch of engineers out of Norfolk, Virginia. And that's probably not what we want. So I think I maybe have taken 30 seconds of the time that Barry ceded to me, but with that, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Great morning. I've been tallying, I think I've got 7 extra minutes on top of my 10. Well, it's a pleasure being here with you all this morning. Before I jump into my opening comments relative to what the city has been doing and will be doing in terms of water quality, I just want to share a little bit more about my background. I grew up in a place where the river caught on fire because of pollution. Cleveland, Ohio, Cuyahoga River. So the issue of the environment and water quality and pollution has been something that has been ingrained in me for a very long time. I've worked in public service for 28 years, excuse me, and have been involved in various types of water quality projects, excuse me, over the years. Lake Michigan, anyone from the Chicago area, lots of steel mills, lots of issues related to water quality. I spent some time in the city of East Chicago, not a very clean place. Was involved in some restoration work in Lake Michigan, and also city of Massillon, another steel town. Lots of pollution in the Tuscarawas River. Lots of projects, little projects that in isolation may not seem like it's doing much, but it kind of reminds me of the story of the starfish scattered along the beach, and everyone takes one and throws it back in. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing at the local level. That's what we're doing here in the city of Naples. My 16 and a half years on the other coast, which is a very similar coast in terms of climate here, has really opened my eyes in terms of how important Florida's ecosystem is to the economy and our quality of life. I've been involved in a number of water quality restoration projects on the East Coast, mangrove islands along in the intercoastal, oyster reef installations. Right before I left Palm Beach, we had just finished up a near $40 million marina project, and all of the spoils from that dredging created what's called Tarpon Cove, which is now being planted as a mangrove island. I was over in Palm Beach about 3 weeks ago, and I see the little saplings coming out of the water, peeking out of the water, which is really neat to see. We also had to deal with the cyanobacteria in the drinking water. Town of Palm Beach gets its drinking water through the city of West Palm Beach's water supply and through its treatment process, which pulls from surface water. So that was a big issue, and that really woke a lot of people up about alternative methods for treating and creating potable water. And then last but not least was those of you, I know the folks up here were involved in the LOSUM, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, and lobbying on behalf of the East Coast to minimize that discharge from Lake Okeechobee into the intercoastal waterway. We were successful. One of the most successful things that came out of that was getting the intercoastal waterway adjacent to Palm Beach designated as an estuary and not as a part of the flood control system. So that's a big win. So I bring all of that experience from a very high level. I'm not a scientist, I'm not I'm not a biologist, I'm a public administrator, but I think it's important to have folks at the top of your organization that understands and can build bridges and provide the support to the subject matter experts to get things done. Nicole mentioned what's happening in Tallahassee. This House bill, was it 1197? I appreciate Nicole actually brought that House bill to my attention several weeks ago, and we added it to a list of a number of other bills that are very concerning to not only the city of Naples, Collier County, but every city that appreciates having the ability to self-govern. Later this week, we will have a list of these bills that are of concern, including the one that Nicole mentioned, and we will provide to you links to your representatives so you can communicate with them and let them know how you as a City of Naples resident feels about being relieved of our duties for making regulations that promote the desires of this community. In terms of what we are doing in the City of Naples, I don't know if any of you have seen the city's annual report. This is accessible on our website, and just go and search for it. We have 10 pages dedicated in this annual report to our nature, environmental sensitivity, and in this report, you'll see what we are doing in all of our departments, because it's not dealing with our nature, water quality, the environment isn't assigned to a singular department. Almost every department has a role to play, including code enforcement, our Parks and Recreation Department, streets and stormwaters, natural resources. We're all playing a role, and there are a lot of things happening. Back to that starfish story. What does oyster reef restoration really mean to the Naples environment, the Bay? Well, it means something, and I think it's important to celebrate what we've been doing. But I think what's more important is to talk about what else we should be doing. And there are a number of projects that are underway. Some are studies, some are actual projects that are underway that I want to highlight. I won't get into the details. Maybe during the Q&A, if there are questions, I can get into the detail. But we are in the process of finalizing a climate adaptation assessment report. This assessment was initially done a few years ago, but then the state DEP required that this vulnerability assessment be updated. We are close to finishing that, and then the next step would be an adaptation plan. What is that action plan to deal with sea level rise and some of the other issues facing the city of Naples? And it's going to be a combination of traditional infrastructure, but green infrastructure is extremely important, and it's something that is proven to work in certain environments, and hopefully that's going to be part of this adaptation plan, this action plan, if you will. I wanted to talk a little bit about the restoration of our beaches. Those of you who have been following the news, there's a pretty significant berm or dune restoration project that will commence soon. It's expected to start on April 3rd. This is a county project, but the city has a seat at the table. Bob Middleton and his team, Natalie, Kate, and Sarah are here, and they're going to help me if I can't answer questions later. They don't know that yet. But they've been actively involved with the county, not only on this berm project to discuss the short-term work, but also the long-term work, which is rebuilding the beaches. And the big question that we posed immediately after Ian is, can we do it differently? Can we build back the beaches higher, wider, more resilient, more robust to the next storm? So hopefully that's the outcome that we get. for the long-term work. We will have more details about the berm project posted on our website soon, including the truck routes and the access points and what to expect in terms of timing for each section of the work. But this is going to involve the entire coastline along the Gulf of Mexico, and we're excited to get that started. Beach outfall project I wanted to touch on. This has been something that's been in the works for many, many years, and we're getting close. So just to kind of recap, the stormwater outfall project is a two-phase project, north phase and a south phase, and both phases are in various stages of design and permitting. We're nearing completion of the design and permitting. And eventually what this project is going to do is transition from a gravity-based drainage system along the coastline to a mechanized two pump stations, two large pump stations that will move the water quicker out to the Gulf of Mexico. But probably one of the most important features of this project is what we do with the water before it's discharged. Today, the water gets into the system and it's pumped. It's not pumped. It's drained out into the Gulf of Mexico through our above surface outfall pipes. Those pipes will disappear, and there will be a treatment process involved in this project. Treatment train is what we call it, where the stormwater is running through a process. It's not going to be potable, so don't drink it, but it will be a much cleaner water than what is discharged today. We will be presenting an update to council here soon at a workshop. When we know the date, we'll post it, and we invite you all to listen in or come and listen in person about what we're doing with water quality and specifically what we'll be doing with this stormwater outfall project. My timer went away. I'm 1 minute over, but I have 6 more. I'm low. Let me touch on just a couple of quick things and I'll wrap up. We are about 60% through a multi-basin stormwater assessment. This is something that we're doing citywide, and the goal is to develop a stormwater model that will simulate the impacts of rainfall and sea level rise and help us determine the extent of the flooding that we may see in the future. So we design systems and infrastructure that will address not only what's happening today, but what we expect will happen tomorrow. Kind of like future-proofing our system to some degree. One of the things that I did want to mention is council a couple weeks ago approved some funding to update and enhance the ACUNE modeling program. Which simulates sea level rise and surge situations, and we'll be using that as a planning tool on our planning department, our natural resources department, and this is something that we'll use to try to educate the public as well. The last thing I want to touch on is our lakes management. Again, at this workshop that we'll have with council soon, we'll give a report on what's happening in terms of our lakes. As you all probably would have suspected, Ian storm surge inundated all of our lakes. They all became saltwater bodies, and with the upcoming rainy season, we expect to see the salinity levels change, and will get us back to a situation that hopefully will be closer to pre-Ian. We've got a lot of plantings that need to be done on the littoral shelves around all of the lakes. These are things that we have lined up for the summer. And with that, I will stop because I'm definitely over my time, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks to Mike, Barry, and Nicole as well. I think you set the table very well. Is this working? Everybody can hear me? Good. I think you set the table very well with lots of issues for us to talk about. So let's dig in and start a conversation. And I'd like to start with the topic of red tide because it is so topical right now here in Naples. Mike, could you offer some thoughts on how we should think about the current and maybe future red tide outbreak we're experiencing, and what you anticipate happening over the next several months, or what could happen over the next several months, and also how this 2023 red tide outbreak compares to what happened in 2018 post-Irma, and what the similarities or differences are.
Sure, thanks, Ray. So there's good news, there's bad news, there's good news, and maybe bad news. So we're doing that. So Ian was a bad storm, we know that. It was mainly bad because of the storm surge. If you compare that to Irma had more rainfall, at least down here, and let's just say south of the Caloosahatchee River. So if you look at runoff from Irma versus Ian, there was about twice as much runoff from Irma. After Ian, we did a much better job, even though it was harder, but we did a much better job after Ian to go out and take a lot of water samples for water quality and nutrients, so on and so forth. In fact, we have our next oceanographic cruise going out tomorrow morning. It leaves from St. Pete, and it does a zigzag going about 60 miles offshore back to the coast, zigzagging up and down to Cape Mountain and then back up. And so we have, and the first one we did was right after Ian in the first week of October. So we have a lot of data coming in. So from a water quality point of view, the impacts to water quality were not nearly as bad as the destruction on the shoreline would. It wasn't the same. The water quality was not as affected. So that's good news on one hand. Coincidentally, probably, we saw red tide start right after Ian. It did the same thing right after Irma. It usually starts at the end of September or October, so there was nothing unusual in that. If you look at the tracks of how red tide developed after Irma and after Ian, February was a worse month after Ian. So as everyone here probably knows, it's like, yeah, this past February was pretty bad. It's starting to, I'm not going to say peter out, it's lower right now. And so typically this is the time of year when it starts to go away. What happened in 2018 was that we think a second bloom came in. So if you look at the old maps of, they have a Flickr gallery of Fish and Wildlife Commission, FWC. They have a Flickr gallery of monthly red tide cell concentrations along the coastline. And you'll see it in, kind of high, February 18, March, April, it starts to go out, it's like, all right, right. And then all of a sudden in June, it just got really big. June, July, August, September were horrible. There were red dots everywhere. And when we look at the data, the oceanographic data, the modeling, we think a second bloom came in May or June. And so right now, it looks like it's potentially going away as we would expect it to do in a normal year. We're not in a normal year with a post-Ian. But after Irma, with that second bloom, that just, all rules were out the window at that point. So I was pretty happy and pretty relieved to see the latest update this past Friday where red tide went lower. It seems to be a mass that was kind of moving up towards Sarasota and then moved down here and then started moving back north, but it seems to be spreading out and dissipating, not necessarily growing. But we'll see what next week holds. It's kind of a hold your breath, fingers crossed. But if it's typical, it should go away. But again, are we in a typical situation right now? It's hard to say.
I'm going to move up here so we don't have to pass the mics back and forth so frequently. So, Mike, what happened in 2018 when we kind of had the round two of the red tide in the summer, you're saying is something that could happen, but there's no evidence that we will see that at this point.
So the best available data suggests that that red tide initiates because of ocean currents. And so many of you may have heard of the loop current out in the Gulf of Mexico. That was kind of on the news a lot with the Macondo oil spill and with the oil getting drained and then move around. So the loop current basically does this big hairpin in the Gulf of Mexico, right off Florida's coastline here. And sometimes the current will touch up on the West Florida shelf. If anyone's a boater, you know our water's really shallow until you get 100, 200 miles offshore. And then it gets really deep really fast. So we call that a shelf break. So when that current hits up against the shelf break, it brings up colder, nutrient-rich water up onto the shelf and it starts to move towards the shoreline. So that's a natural fertilization process that we think is what starts red tide. The cooler water, nutrient-rich water, red tide says, all right, game on, here we go. Starts growing, moves inshore. Once it hits our coastline, it's like a traffic jam on I-75. Then you have our nutrients come in, start to feed it, so on and so forth. So we think that happened in September, October, typically, and we think it happened in 2018 in May, June. And then it came on shore. There were enough nutrients in the system. Again, probably us, but maybe a lot of the dead fish around. Maybe there's other factors that feed into red tide as well. And so there was just enough in the system still to support that second bloom that came in.
And a question perhaps for you, perhaps for Barry, or both of you. What is, in your judgment, the relationship between the Everglades, more specifically Lake Okeechobee, and releases from Lake Okeechobee into the Caloosahatchee River and nutrient discharges then into the estuary and the Gulf, and the outbreak of red tide and harmful algae blooms that we've been seeing intermittently over the last period of years? Can you talk about what science and research is showing about that relationship?
I'll say one thing and then hand it over to Barry. I don't want to dominate, but we just talked about this in class. And so one thing, there's no easy relationship between Lake Okeechobee nutrients, discharge out in Caloosahatchee, nutrients getting into the Gulf of Mexico and affecting red tide. There have been 3 studies that have come out in the past 2 or 3 years suggesting a relationship exists, but it's not a smoking gun. It's not. Caloosahatchee River discharge explains 90% of red tide. It's more like 10% or 20%. When you look at all the nutrients that are required to support a big bloom, the flows out of the Caloosahatchee maybe are 10 to 20%. So there's more to it than just that. It definitely plays a role, but there's more to it.
So added to that, Lake Okeechobee doesn't have the nutrient content that the watershed has. The watershed surrounding the Caloosahatchee River is at least 50% of the nutrient loading coming out into the estuary. So it's often obscured, and we often want to say, oh, Lake Okeechobee discharges. But keep in mind that water is running through a large marsh area. There's a lot of nutrients that are removed. It's a lot full of tannins, the brown color from Lake Okeechobee. But it's a long waterway, and there's a lot of organisms that take advantage of the nutrients, a lot of blue-green algae blooms right in the Caloosahatchee, and anywhere that the water is quiet, it gives a chance for those organisms to come up to the surface, take advantage of the sunlight, and grow. So that link, like Mike said, is, let's say it's 10%, but 5% of that is the watershed nutrients. The other 5% would be the lake nutrients. So I think red tide has a mind of its own.
And Barry, while you're holding the mic, let's continue on the topic. So the so-called CERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which was started in 2000, 23 years ago, by Bill Clinton and Jeb Bush. I don't think anybody in the audience is old enough to remember them, but they were president and governor at one time. But so we've been working on this comprehensive Everglades restoration plan for 23 years. Happily, in recent years, there's been more money put into it by both the state and the federal government, and we're making faster progress now. Assuming that program is completed, with many more billions of dollars spent on wetlands creation and reservoirs and so on by 2030, 2035, whatever the date is. Would you expect that to have, what kind of an impact would you expect that to have on water quality in our region in terms of cyanobacteria, red tide? How big of a difference is that going to make from a water quality standpoint?
Yeah, the SERP has originally 68 projects, major projects, and then some minor projects. One of the minor projects down here is the former Golden Gate Estates. That is one of the biggest projects that is part of SERP, but part is called the other project element. So that one has the greatest impact for down here. But overall, the goal of SERP had just a minor component of water quality. I'll tell you a story. I worked on SERP before it was SERP, and they had no water quality components at all. And I was managing Lake Okeechobee. So they came to me and said, hey, you're doing water quality in Lake Okeechobee, can we add it into SERP? So SERP, all the SERP features that have water quality, but it's kind of an add-on function. Because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers vacillates between water quality is not our concern, it's a state concern. But they can't discharge poor water quality, so they are involved in it, but it's really the state's responsibility to remove the phosphorus and if nitrogen is of concern. Will we see the kind of improvement that you're talking about? It's more about the timing and delivery of water quantity that SERP is responsible for. There's quality is in there, but it's not as big a component as we'd probably like.
And Nicole, you spoke about the connection between land and water, and the restoration is only half of the answer. Can you add any comments to what Barry said regarding the Everglades restoration plan and what it means for us?
Sure, and I agree. It's an odd relationship between the state and federal partnership for Everglades restoration, because the Corps is very much about the water quantity, and so getting the water where it needs to go in the right timing. And then the state comes along and they build the water quality components of those SERP projects, sort of parallel, but sometimes it comes a little bit after the fact. One of the important projects that is currently in process, it's called the C43 reservoir. And that is going to take water during those times of excess flows when it's being discharged from Lake Okeechobee. It will store it in just an enormous reservoir that is actually larger than the city of Naples, acreage-wise, square mileage-wise. And it will do some treatment to that water, and then during the times of low flow, because the Caloosahatchee, it needs water when it needs water, but it doesn't need that excess water during rainy season, and it certainly doesn't need water that has a lot of blue-green algae, red tide potential with it. So it will release that water back to the Caloosahatchee during the times of low flow, hopefully with a water quality treatment component, so it's clean water coming out. So, things like that I think are going to be extremely important. I think it was Jay that mentioned the new Lake Okeechobee management schedule, and that's going to be very, very important, because for the past probably 13 years, the west coast of Florida has just been hammered by excess discharges during the rainy season. Too much water, it blows out that salinity balance in our estuaries. The new plan, which should be online functional by the end of this year, that's really going to take a look at getting enough water to the Caloosahatchee when it needs it, but not blasting out those estuaries unless it's, all bets are off, you have a huge hurricane. So, I think that there are good things that are happening there, but it's just this sometimes uncomfortable relationship between the state and federal agencies of water quality versus water quantity.
And while you have the mic, let me ask you another question, shifting subjects slightly, but the Conservancy has been at the forefront in criticizing the size and pace of new development that's occurring in eastern Collier County. All these very large, primarily residential, in some cases mixed-use projects that have been kind of systematically approved one after another by the county, and most of which have not either begun to be built yet or certainly are not built out. What is the Conservancy observed or found out about the relationship between this residential growth in that part of the county and water quality and other water issues? Can you comment on that?
Well, I think one very easy thing to observe is with the development that is in process or that we know is going to happen in eastern Collier County. And when we're talking eastern Collier County, we're talking about the almost 200,000 acres east of Golden Gate Estates. And there's the capacity out there for at least 45,000 acres of new towns and villages. We know that's what the major landowners would like out there. And it's not about no development out there, but it's really about the location of the development, avoiding wetlands, avoiding habitat for panthers and other listed species. It's about how you develop, making sure that development is dense enough, clustered enough, so that the people that live there can also work and play there. It's about making sure that those developments are logically located so that the taxpayers aren't having to spend billions and billions of dollars to put new roads and new infrastructure going out to serve these new communities. So with the water quality connection, I think one very easy thing to understand is the developments that are in the permitting process, and this is going to be eastern Collier County and also southeast Lee County. They're proposing to impact over 1,000 acres of wetlands. We know that wetlands are really nature's kidneys. They cleanse the water, they hold the water. 1 acre of wetland can store up to 1.5 million gallons of floodwater. So when you talk about bang for your buck and the probably hardest working, cheapest green infrastructure we have, it's to keep the wetlands that you have there and intact. So I think destruction of wetlands, that becomes one of the big issues. Water supply is another issue that I don't have all the answers to, but I do know more communities, more of the typical gated golf course communities, a lot of residential units. Those are going to have large lawns. They're going to be pulling more water for landscaping irrigation. Is there going to be enough water there for people, for ag, for nature? That's a huge balancing act. So that one I don't have all the answers to, but the wetland destruction is just a really easy one for everyone to understand.
And the wetlands protection really is largely originates really at the state of Florida in terms of who can pass the regulations and provide the enforcement necessary for that to occur.
It is, and when you're looking at wetlands permitting, just in the past couple of years, that function has been given from the federal government. It's usually the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that evaluates wetlands permitting. That has been delegated to the state of Florida through our Department of Environmental Protection. The Conservancy and a number of environmental groups are actually actively litigating against that delegation from the EPA to the state of Florida, and a lot of concerns associated with that. I was sort of nudging the Corps a little bit that you don't want to have your storm surge plan designed by a group of Corps engineers out of Norfolk, Virginia. The Corps, they do very good work, and as far as wetlands permitting, they perform an important function. One of the biggies being that you have federal mechanisms in place when the federal agencies work on those wetland permitting issues that you simply don't have with the state of Florida. So a lot of concern that if the state is really the only entity doing wetlands permitting, We're not going to get projects that are as good as they should be. We're not going to get the protection of listed species habitat or the protection of wetlands that we should have. So it is all with the state of Florida. Hopefully a federal judge will reverse that, but that's still in process.
I just want to note for the record that you denigrated Norfolk, Virginia several times. I hope there's nobody in the audience from Norfolk, but if you are.
Nothing against Norfolk, and again, nothing against the Corps of Engineers. It's just that when we're talking about local planning that is going to change our landscape, they need to hear from the public, or else they're not going to know that what you care about is something that you care about.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears to our coastline. And Jay, we've got, as I thought about it today, I was listening to everybody's comments, we've got two huge things on our plate right now. Not just Naples, but Collier County writ large. One is the emergency berm project, and following that, the full restoration of our beaches that will have to occur post-Ian. And the second is this, which is still a big unknown as to how it's going to play out, this Corps of Engineers coastal storm risk study that is going to be rebooted and restarted apparently here in the next month or so. County commissioners are supposed to approve the restart on March 28th next week. So how do you think about what's going to be coming down the road in terms of these two efforts, and it ties in obviously to the resilience planning that we're going to be doing with the city that you described to the audience. What are your thoughts as to how we might begin to approach this, at least within the city of Naples?
Thanks for that question. Well, what we can't do is sit by and let the planning happen without city input. So having a seat at the table is critical. And we have a seat at the table in terms of the beaches and the berm. And we will have a seat at the table with this Army Corps study. This is, I think the city and Collier County has a great opportunity here post-Ian to use a little bit of imagination and try to promote collaboration. I think Nicole's spot on. You've got different agencies that have different focuses, moving water, cleaning water, and if you don't have everybody at the table together collaborating and poking holes through each other's programs, you're not going to end up with a good outcome. My message and our focus at the city staff level with the support of council is to have a strong role in the decision making, because at the end of the day, we've got this coastline that we have to live in. And to have others dictate what it's going to look like and how it's going to function, I think it would be irresponsible of us to not be a part of that conversation.
And I think for the audience, it's important. These are two items that all of you should be really focused on, if you're not already, and your friends and neighbors should be too. How this rebooted Corps of Engineers study plays out. And we have, our message from the city has been not only to give us a seat at the table, but public engagement at the community level, at the HOA level, at the neighborhood level. And then similarly, this emergency berm project is really just the start of what's going to be a massive multi-year effort to rebuild our beaches and our dunes. One of the concerns that we had the county official who's in charge of that meet just yesterday, make a presentation at council, and one of the things that a number of us find concerning is that there, in this first phase, going to be no vegetative plantings in the emergency berm. If we have some unfortunate storm events this spring and summer, we may see $24 million worth of sand scattered throughout Collier County because nothing has been really stabilized. So these are issues that all of you should be concerned about. Nicole, anything you want to add on further on the Corps of Engineers study?
Well, I do appreciate you bringing up the fact that any plantings for the emergency berm will come later because, I agree. I think that the city, I don't know if the city has the ability to go out and maybe do something more proactive before the county gets involved, but to put sand there without anchoring it with, and not just COs, but all sorts of really good, I guess, root deep dune vegetation is going to be super important. I mean, it's just protecting our investment. It's a no-brainer. And as far as the core process, and I think I touched on all of the concerns there, whatever comes out of this planning process, it's going to be an extremely expensive project, and so I think, and I can't remember if I mentioned this in my opening comments, but it was slated in 2020 to cost about $2.2 billion. Well, everything is more expensive now than it was in 2020, and with the county's cost share being about 35%, this is something that will be $700 million plus that the county is going to have to pay for. So we really have to make sure that we're getting what it is that we truly want and truly need out of that process.
Thank you. And Jay, back to you, as you were making your comments, it made me reflect upon what a list of priorities we have in the environmental and water area just in the city. I mean, we've got the Beach Outfalls project, which is probably the most expensive public works project that the city has ever done. $35 million estimated cost that we're beginning capitally and it's moving forward, but it's a lot of implementation left. We've got to come back now and restore our lakes, many of which were damaged by Ian. We have the basin assessments, which are underway, but will give us information about what the next stormwater management projects will need to look like. We've got the beach restoration projects. There's never been a time in Naples history where we've had so much on our plate. And I know you and your team have done a great job of trying to get grant money out of Tallahassee over the last several years and again this year's. But just talk a little bit more about how you assess these priorities and think about making sure we have the capacity to get the job done in the water and environmental area.
Everything seems to be a priority. That's first. And yes, our plates are full. We actually have some things that have fallen on the ground. So there's a lot happening, and it's sometimes we pause and it just becomes kind of overwhelming. I know we all felt that way, and you all felt that way right after Ian. Like, how do we clean this up? How do we get back to normal? And the way you do it is, one thing at a time. But not really one thing at a time, because we'll never get everything done. There are lots of things happening on parallel tracks that are interrelated. And, the stormwater project, Bob and his team have been working, and I'm not exaggerating, 7 days a week for the last year, trying to move these projects forward. We've been talking about a lot of things, and we need action. So we're getting there. We're getting close to actually seeing something happen with the stormwater outfall project. The lakes restoration, that was underway. We have, I believe, the design work is about 30% done for 8 and 9. So there are things happening at the lakes level. Nothing is moving fast enough, to satisfy any of us, especially our staff. You got to understand that our staff in our natural resources department and our broader team. I mean, we're passionate about this stuff. You know, this is you know, what we went to school for, and this is this is part of our day to day. So you know, we take it personally, the work that's on our plate. But in terms of the priorities, there's a lot. You know, we have this dashboard that was created a few months ago to communicate not only to the public but to our staff the number of things that are important to our town council. That is not our to-do list. I keep telling people that is not our to-do list. That's a fraction of things that we have to deal with, and many of the things that we're having to deal with are on a personnel side. But on that list are a number of water quality related issues, and I think it's important to have dashboards like this so we can check in with the community. We can give updates to the community regarding progress, and this workshop that's coming up, I believe, I'll let you know before we end here today what that date is, but we're going to provide a good update on the progress of these projects at that
I
meeting.
think it's April 3rd.
Okay, is that April 3rd, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. So on April 3rd in council chambers, we'll have an update on many of the things that we've talked about today.
Well, my comment to the residents here would be that 4 years ago when I joined council, I'll just say, most of these things were words on a piece of paper. I mean, they weren't even in process. And I think what has changed gradually, incrementally, and I think in the last year or so even more forcefully, is that all of these things are in motion and not moving as fast as we would like in every case. They never are. But we are actually engaged in project work now that's very positive in the environmental area. Let's not forget to repair Venetian building seawalls, which is obviously a big priority for you folks up here, which has a water and environmental component to it also, and that first phase is underway. So things are moving, and that's positive. Before we run out of time, I want to circle back, Mike and Barry, to you with an important issue that we jumped over. You mentioned it, Mike, in your opening comments, which is the governor's blue-green algae task force, its efforts, and you know, some things have been done, other things that are still in process, some just not moved through the political process. But what would you identify as the one or two most important things from a water quality standpoint that have been recommended by the task force, but not yet acted on or implemented at the state level that would make a difference here in Southwest Florida? If you could wave a magic wand.
The biggest issue really is nutrients coming from agriculture. And so the issue there is that they have what's called best management practices. And so it's basically a spreadsheet / model where they work with Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, DACS, and they say if you take these measures, if you water at this time, if you grade your soil this way, so on and so forth, you will reduce your nutrient load by 50%. And they give each other a high five and walk away. They never check to see if it actually reduced nutrients by 50%. And so it's all on paper. And so one of our recommendations is like, well, can we check? And so we proposed that, we recommended that. The previous Chief Science Officer, Tom Frazier, was in pretty heavy negotiations with DACS and some of the lobbying groups about it. And just like Nicole mentioned, how developers are saying it's going to be too expensive for this stormwater upgrade, so on and so forth. That's an excuse for everything, honestly. It's like, it's too expensive. It's a lot easier to do it up front rather than to go back and try to fix it, you know? And so I don't want to climb up on what's it called? My soapbox, there we go, yeah. But I think, you know, what we're really looking at is whatever the models are generating, whatever Department of Environmental Protection, DAX, whoever, if they say this is how much, these are the nutrients that are being reduced, here are innovative technologies to reduce nutrients, we need the data. You know, it really comes down to, is it really working or is it not? So I think the most important thing would be, you know, coming back and just, and not pointing fingers at ag, but just be like, look, it's not 50%, okay? It's not anything. So can we really try to do this? I mean, I don't want to spend $50 on a steak. I like steak, you know, and I don't want to spend $10 on a gallon of milk. And we need food. We need agriculture. We need to use fertilizer. But can we do it better? And instead of fighting about it, I think we need to figure that out.
And it's also a reminder of combining that with what Nicole was talking about with the stormwater, the proposed new stormwater regulation, that having some kind of a ability to regulate / inspect / monitor pollution, whether it's from agriculture, whether it's from municipal stormwater systems, whatever it is. Septic tank inspection is another issue that was on your list, correct? And with the task force. These are things that instinctively a lot of people react negatively to, because who likes regulation? But without it, it's unlikely we're going to make the progress that we need to make. Okay, we wanted to offer a little bit of time for questions from the audience, and I think we're at that point. So if anybody would like to ask a question, please come forward to the microphone.
Good morning. The media has been reporting on this huge blob of seaweed heading our way. None of you have the time to talk about it. Can you comment on what we're facing this summer?
Well, we have the world's foremost expert on the sargassum blob here, Dr. Rosen, and I promised him that when we got to Q&A from the audience, somebody would ask that question. So, Barry, I'm turning it over to you.
So if you live on the second story or higher in your condo, you're fine. First story, the blob is going to get you. So the word blob invokes, the horror movies that we saw as children. So it's really an inaccurate term. And it is a large mass of brown algae. And it's been around for a long time. The Caribbean has been hammered by it. Miami Beach gets some. It's down in the Keys right now. It's 110 miles away. But unless you're looking at circulation patterns on will it come anywhere near us versus the Yucatan Peninsula, we really don't know. And actually there was a slight downturn in growth between January and February. So it has to grow, it has to get here, and you have to have just the right wind and wave action to push it up onto shore. Oh, but it's not toxic. It's not like red tide, which is right here. So will it be an issue? I think the media pushed it way farther than the science at this point.
Good morning, Dan.
Hey, thank you. Question for Jay on your Algal project. You mentioned the treatment process that would presumably, I hope, remove some of the nutrients that these storms stir up, and you have that much water that you've got to pump out. What is that nutrient, or what is that treatment process, and what nutrients does it in fact remove?
I have this. You hear me? No. So I have the team here for a reason. If we wanted to get granular, because a high level on this stuff. But in terms of this treatment train, it's inclusive of a number of things, including moving our water through our lake system and using nature to help clean this water. One of the things that we're going to be doing soon, and this is related to Mr. Parsons' comments, is getting some baseline data. Because we're being told that the water will be cleaner. The question is how much cleaner. So we don't have this baseline data, fresh data. We have some old data from several years ago, but we'll be getting new data that will be able to compare post-construction water quality to. So Bob, I don't know if there's any more detail in terms of the treatment train that you want to talk about, and what's inclusive in that?
I was hoping to avoid this, but I'm Bob Middleton, I'm the Public Works Director for the city. There's several parts to the water quality improvement treatment train. Jay mentioned the lakes. The lakes is where it all starts. When the water's collected in the lakes, we do have nutrient removal there. Then the solid material, coconuts, the landscape material that winds up in the lakes, there's screening that takes place in the new system that is not necessarily taking place now. Removing all that floating material out of the lakes improves water quality also. The drainage structures, the inlets going into the stormwater collection system or transfer system will remove organic material and reduce nutrients that way. Then when it finally gets to the pump station, we redo that again by removing any material, particulate matter that's in the waste stream or in the stream prior to being pumped off into the Gulf of Mexico. And these are offshore discharges. These are 1,100 and 1,500 feet off the coast versus what we have right now, which is direct discharge at the shoreline. We want to move that away from the coastal area and get it into a deeper saltwater environment that's going to be less contact for humans. I'm sure I'm forgetting something else, but I'll pass the baton back.
And I'll just say that when Dave introduced me, he mentioned the Environmental Advisory Committee that I've been overseeing for the last several years, and that part of that group has been interested in this water quality treatment issue with the Beach Hill Falls project, and we're going to be meeting in the near term with the city staff, and then I think this will be discussed as part of the April 3rd meeting as well. So it's a very relevant question as to what we're doing to ensure, as Jay said earlier, that the quality of the water going out into the Gulf is greatly improved over what it has been in the past, and that we have the ability to collect data to reassure ourselves that it indeed is happening.
And just to talk a little bit more about our drainage system and what homeowners can do to help us. Landscapers are notorious for blowing grass clippings into the storm drains. So these blades of grass are rich with fertilizer. So that's something that needs to be avoided. And one of the things that I learned when I got here to Naples is the city years ago had adopted a fertilizer ordinance, a fertilizer ban during the rainy season. You don't need that during the rainy season. So all of these little pieces and parts add up to a whole, and there are things that residents can do or advise their lawn maintenance folks to do to help us keep these things out of our storm systems so we don't have to later.
Thank you. Looks, I know we're a little bit past our stop time, but we have two more questions, so let's take them. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the panel. This has been really enlightening, and I appreciate all the efforts locally, county level. But I think earlier, maybe Nicole said something about the governor having issued an executive order, but the legislature likely to go in a different direction. The governor has a lot on his mind right now. To what extent would he be likely to veto it? Can he? Would the legislature just override? What kind of pressure could be brought to bear in Tallahassee? Because the scale of what we're talking about seems to require it. Thank you.
Well, they need to hear from you and from all of us. Certainly, legislators are elected, and so if there are bills that are very concerning to constituents, certainly if those bad bills make it to the full floor for a vote, very important to weigh in, and the governor needs to know that the public cares about these issues, to the point that he does have a lot going on. So how to get his attention on that? If he has 10, 20,000 of his constituents that are saying it's important to veto this bad bill, this bad water bill, this bad growth bill, that makes an impact. There was a bill last session, 2508,
which was very controversial. It would have circumvented some of the governor's Everglades restoration water policy agenda by making some changes to how this Lake Okeechobee system operating manual was regulated. It would have taken some power away that was very important. And the legislature pushed the bill forward, and the governor heard from the public, heard from his constituents, and he vetoed it. And that was a very, very powerful message. So absolutely, the governor and the legislators need to hear from each and every one of us. That's really, I think, the only way to kind of get through.
And relating to the city, as Jay mentioned, well, just yesterday at our meeting, we had a conversation with our state lobbyist. She was with us via Zoom, going over the list of what we consider to be the priority bills to be concerned about. And I think by the end of this week, we're going to have something developed that will probably be ready to go on our website and out to the community. So with one of our periodic, city announcements to the to residents, and I think our communications to residents have improved dramatically in the last year, and the number of people to whom we have emails has expanded, and we'll do it through the HOAs like GSAC as well. So you'll be hearing more about this and having specific information about specific bills that you could write to our senator and Senator Pasadomo, Representative Rommel, and anybody else about your concerns. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you for doing all of you doing in your representation and information. I appreciate it very much. On a positive note, I do want to thank the manager, the City of Naples manager. When I got here a couple of weeks ago, the red tide was really bad. I called the governor's office, I called your office, and I called the Public Works. I spoke with a man, Will Mitchell. The response was amazing. They came, cleaned the beaches, they did an amazing job, and thank you for your response. In my opinion, I think that the red tide is one of the hot subjects or topics, because now it's getting national attention. I'm not sure if anyone has watched Tucker Carlson's segment. I read it online. Supposedly he had some scientists weigh in and doing a study on a Gulf Shore red tide, and they're alleging that it causes Algal disease. So I called the governor's office. I do, thank you, Nicole, for suggesting, would like a handout, how to reach these politicians' offices will be great, because I know that I had very great response, and I think you're absolutely correct to contact those politicians, because it becomes a political issue, it seems to me. And I honestly would like to suggest not only a handout for us to contact these people, whoever or whatever the issue or the legislation, but also I think we should contact this administration, President Biden, because he claims to be that he is the czar of the police of environment. I think that they should be notified. Also, I have a question. Now, we have red tide on the West Coast. Why not in the East Coast? We don't have the same problem. Since I remember, or as I recall, they've had hurricanes as bad as we did, and I don't remember red tide being a problem like this one. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all your work, honestly, and your information, and I hope that we can get some handout or something about all what you're doing and what you would like us to do, because we're here to help. And also, where is this restoration plan? And is one enough to take care of this issue with the red tide? Because I think, as I said, again, the red tide seems to be a hot issue now that it's getting national attention.
Thank you.
Please, thank you so much. I'm sorry.
Just real quick, Mike. Is red tide a Gulf of Mexico phenomenon only? Any red tide in the Atlantic or other oceanic bodies?
So the state of Florida doesn't like for us to call it Florida red tide, But when we talk about Florida red tide, it is different from any red tide anywhere else. There's red tide up in New England, it's a different species. There's red tide in Japan. There's red tide in Korea. They're different, completely different. So what we call Florida red tide is caused by a dinoflagellate called Corynebrotus. And it is endemic to the Gulf of Mexico. Its main home is here on the West Florida shelf, about 75 miles off of Venice probably. And so when you look at the water and the circulation patterns, and it ties into the sargassum, and it ties into the Macondo oil spill, the West Florida shelf is unique in that we have this mass of water that kind of doesn't really interact with the rest of the Gulf of Mexico. It's almost like a gated community, if you will, our own water here. That has good things. Sargassum has less of a chance of hitting us than, say, Texas. Macondo oil, Belgium had a better chance of getting hit by Macondo oil than we did. So having this gated community helps, but it keeps red tide in our waters, and it doesn't really move around that much. Sometimes it'll sneak up onto the panhandle, sometimes it gets entrained into the loop current, into the Florida current, and then heads up the East Coast. So you can get it in the East Coast, but the currents carry it from the West Coast of Florida. So there is a separate population off of the coast of Texas, and it can affect not only Texas, but down into Mexico, but it's separate from our West Florida shelf. So this is, luckily, our problem in our backyard.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. I think we've reached the hour of completion. Would you please give this wonderful panel Thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Dave Fight.
Ray, thanks so much for, are we live here? Hello. Ray, thanks so much for putting this together, and Mike, Barry, Nicole, and Jay, you were fantastic. Somebody talked about best practices. This has to be one of them, putting this together today. And one of the things about best practices is you usually measure how you do. So I think what we'll do is we'll do this again next year and see how well we do in it. So anyway, again, thank you very much for doing this. A couple editorials from GSAC on the way out. We were very involved with the Corps of Engineers project a couple of years ago. We tried to be very involved. The communication process there was weak at best, and actually the thing got shut down properly and rightfully so. We all know it's starting up again. We will be very involved in this time. We have 2 members of our board who are back. The last time we'll probably have 4 this time, so rest assured we'll be on top of it. And the second thing is we talked about the dune plantings. The private dune, I'll call it the private dune, that's north of Park Shore Drive, the storm dune that's being rebuilt, a 10 to 13 foot high dune that goes from essentially from Park Shore Drive up to Seagate. There will be plantings on the west side of that dune that will be put in place sometime this spring. They are all DEP approved plantings. They'll require minimum water. They'll require absolutely no fertilization and no insecticides, so they'll be completely environmentally friendly. And I can tell you it's a probably $1.5 million proposition to get it done, and it's done privately by the condos and the people who live in the condos in the north. So anyway, that's a couple of editorials from us. Thank you all for being here today. I did mention that this is going to be videoed. It'll be available probably tomorrow or the next day on our website. But there was one other thing I wanted to mention, that if you want to know a little bit more even about water, this afternoon, this church is holding a program to discuss, and I know nothing about this amendment, but evidently there's a proposed Florida constitutional amendment, the right to clean and healthy water, and they're having a symposium on that at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Everybody's invited if you'd like to come back, and they're looking for gathering. I think their environmental committee is looking forward to a petition supporting a drive for signatures so they can be on the ballot in 2024. So with that, thank you all for being here. Have a great day.